November 1940, Toledo, Ohio. The Willys Overland plant had just completed what seemed like an impossible task. In exactly 75 days, engineers had designed, built and delivered 2 prototype vehicles to the United States Army. They called it the Quad, named for its 4-wheel drive system. It was small, boxy and utilitarian. Nothing about it suggested it would become one of the most desired vehicles in military history. Yet within 4 years, German officers would risk their lives to capture these machines, prize them above nearly all other American equipment, and openly admit that the United States had created something their own engineers could not match. The story begins not with triumph, but with skepticism. When photographs of the early American Jeep prototypes reached German intelligence officers in late 1941, the response was dismissive. The vehicle looked primitive. It had no doors. The windshield could fold flat. The body was a simple pressed steel shell with exposed bolts and minimal protection from the elements. To German military planners who had spent years developing the Volkswagen Kübelwagen, this American creation seemed amateurish. One intelligence report from early 1942 described it as appearing hastily assembled, lacking the engineering sophistication expected from a modern military vehicle. The Germans had confidence in their own light vehicles. The Kübelwagen had been designed by Ferdinand Porsche himself, derived from the people's car that Hitler had championed. It was lighter than early Jeep prototypes, had a flat underbody that helped it slide over obstacles, and despite having only rear-wheel drive, performed admirably in testing. German engineers believed their approach was superior. Why waste resources on complex 4-wheel drive systems when clever engineering could achieve similar results with less mechanical complexity? This confidence would prove tragically misplaced. The American Jeep was not a hastily assembled compromise. It was the product of intense competition, brutal testing, and ruthless refinement. In June 1940, the United States Army had issued one of the most demanding procurement requests in automotive history. They wanted a 1/4-ton reconnaissance vehicle that could carry 3 men and equipment, travel cross-country in any terrain, be simple enough for anyone to drive, rugged enough to withstand combat abuse, and light enough to be lifted by 4 soldiers when stuck. The specifications were brutally specific. Wheelbase no more than 80 inches. Height no more than 40 inches. Weight under 1,300 pounds. 4-wheel drive. Capable of climbing a 60% grade. Fording capability for 18 inches of water. The deadline for the first prototype was equally brutal. 49 days from contract award to delivery of a working vehicle. Most automotive manufacturers declined to even bid. 3 companies accepted the challenge. American Bantam Car Company, a small firm in Butler, Pennsylvania that had been building miniature cars, surprised everyone by delivering the first working prototype exactly on schedule on September 23, 1940. The Bantam prototype, called the Blitz buggy, worked beautifully in initial tests, but the Army had concerns about Bantam's production capacity. Could a company that had built only 1,200 vehicles in 1939 possibly manufacture tens of thousands of military vehicles? The Army invited 2 larger manufacturers to study the Bantam design and submit their own proposals. Willys Overland of Toledo, Ohio, and Ford Motor Company both examined the Bantam carefully, then produced their own versions incorporating improvements. The result was 3 competing vehicles, each with different strengths, tested ruthlessly throughout late 1940 and early 1941. Bantam had pioneered the layout. Willys contributed the powerful Go Devil engine producing 60 horsepower. Ford refined the body design with the now iconic flat hood and integrated headlights. In July 1941, the Army made its decision. Willys would be the primary contractor, but the design would incorporate the best features from all 3 companies. Ford would also build vehicles to the exact same specifications. The standardized 1/4-ton reconnaissance car, designated the Willys MB and Ford GPW, entered full production in November 1941, just weeks before Pearl Harbor. What emerged from the Toledo and Detroit factories was unlike anything the world had seen. The MB and GPW shared identical specifications: length of 132 inches, width of 62 inches, height with windshield up of 72 inches, weight of 2,160 pounds. The Go Devil engine displaced 134 cubic inches and produced 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. Top speed approached 60 miles per hour on roads. Ground clearance of 8 3/4 inches allowed it to traverse terrain that would stop conventional vehicles. The four-wheel drive system, with a 2-speed transfer case, could be engaged or disengaged by simple floor levers. Most remarkably, the vehicle could be field-maintained with basic tools. The engine had been designed for durability over precision. Tolerances were loose compared to civilian engines, which actually made the power plant more reliable under combat conditions. Parts were interchangeable between Willys and Ford production. A mechanic could grab components from any Jeep to repair another. The name itself reflected the vehicle's versatility. While debate continues about the exact origin, most historians agree that Jeep derived from the pronunciation of GP, military shorthand for general purpose or government procurement. Soldiers testing early prototypes in 1941 began calling them Jeeps, possibly influenced by a Popeye comic strip character named Eugene the Jeep, who could go anywhere and do anything. The name stuck. When a journalist from the Washington Daily News rode in one of the early production vehicles in February 1941 and asked what it was called, the driver replied, "It's a Jeep." The article ran nationwide. Willys recognized the marketing potential and trademarked the name in 1943, though soldiers had been using it informally for 2 years by then. General George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, called the Jeep America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. War correspondent Ernie Pyle, who followed American troops through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and the Pacific, wrote that the Jeep was as faithful as a dog, as strong as a mule, and as agile as a goat. It did everything and went everywhere. But these accolades came later. In early 1942, as the first Jeeps began arriving in combat zones, German intelligence officers maintained their skepticism. The initial encounters between German forces and American Jeeps occurred in North Africa in late 1942. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa, brought American forces into direct contact with Axis troops for the first time. Thousands of Jeeps landed with the invasion force. German and Italian soldiers got their first close look at the vehicles Americans had been producing by the thousands. The initial German assessment was mixed. Captured intelligence reports from early 1943 acknowledged the Jeep's speed and cross-country mobility, but criticized what observers saw as poor fuel economy, minimal armor protection, and vulnerability to mines and small arms fire. One report noted that American forces seemed to have unlimited numbers of these vehicles, suggesting wasteful overproduction rather than actual tactical necessity. The Kübelwagen, German analysts argued, achieved similar mobility with half the horsepower and simpler mechanics. At German headquarters in Tunisia, officers examining their first captured Jeep in January 1943 found much to criticize. The exposed engine compartment could be damaged by mud and debris. The canvas top provided no protection from shrapnel or small arms fire. The fuel tank mounted directly beneath the driver's seat seemed like a catastrophic design flaw. The simple 3-speed transmission lacked the sophistication of German vehicles, but there were troubling observations as well. The Jeep's power-to-weight ratio was remarkable. With 60 horsepower moving only 2,100 pounds, it could accelerate faster than almost any German light vehicle. The four-wheel drive system, engaged by simple floor levers, worked flawlessly even in deep sand. Most disturbing was the realization that Americans were producing these vehicles at an incomprehensible rate. Captured documents revealed production figures that German intelligence initially dismissed as propaganda. According to these documents, Willys and Ford together were building Jeeps at a rate of 1 every 90 seconds during peak production, every 90 seconds. German intelligence officers recalculated multiple times, certain there must be an error in translation. There was no error. By early 1943, American factories had already produced over 177,000 Jeeps. German production of all light military vehicles combined barely exceeded 50,000. The implications were staggering. If American industrial capacity could produce reconnaissance vehicles in such quantities, what did that suggest about tanks, artillery, aircraft? The first reports of German soldiers actively seeking to capture American Jeeps came from Tunisia in March 1943. After the Battle of Kasserine Pass, where German forces had initially pushed American troops back, retreating Wehrmacht units took with them every operational Jeep they could find. Officers wrote in after-action reports that the captured American vehicles proved invaluable for reconnaissance and command functions. The reasons became clear as the North African campaign progressed. The terrain of Tunisia combined rocky mountain passes, deep sand wadis, and coastal roads in varying states of repair. German vehicles struggled. The Kübelwagen, despite its clever design, lacked the power to climb steep grades while carrying full loads. Its rear-wheel drive system, adequate in testing grounds, proved inadequate in combat conditions where speed often meant survival. Heavier German vehicles consumed precious fuel at rates that strained already overstretched supply lines. The American Jeep, by contrast, seemed purpose-built for exactly these conditions. Its powerful engine pulled it up grades that stopped Kübelwagens. The four-wheel drive system maintained traction in sand and mud where rear-wheel drive vehicles spun helplessly. Most critically, captured Jeeps came with something German vehicles lacked: abundant spare parts. American logistics were so efficient that maintenance depots held massive stocks of replacement components. German mechanics found they could keep captured Jeeps running indefinitely simply by raiding American supply dumps. Oberst Wolfgang Müller, commanding a reconnaissance battalion in Tunisia, wrote in his journal in April 1943 that his men had captured 6 American Jeeps and immediately put them into service. Within 2 weeks, he had requested that his own German vehicles be replaced entirely with captured American equipment. The Jeeps were faster, more reliable, and easier to maintain than anything in his original motor pool. When his request was denied due to fuel concerns, he noted bitterly that his Kübelwagens were consuming nearly as much fuel while covering half the distance. May 1943 brought the collapse of Axis forces in North Africa. When Jürgen von Arnim surrendered on May 13th, approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers entered Allied captivity. Among the equipment abandoned or destroyed were several hundred captured American Jeeps that German units had been operating. Allied intelligence officers cataloguing abandoned Axis equipment were surprised to find so many of their own vehicles among the German motor pools. Interrogations of captured German officers revealed a consistent pattern. Given the choice between a German Kübelwagen and a captured American Jeep, officers overwhelmingly preferred the Jeep. Some units had been operating captured American vehicles for months. Maintenance records showed these vehicles often logged more operational hours than German equipment. The fuel consumption issue proved largely irrelevant when German logistics were collapsing anyway. The intelligence reports from North Africa reached German high command in Berlin by June 1943. The conclusions were uncomfortable. American industrial capacity was producing vehicles in quantities Germany could never match. The American Jeep, initially dismissed as primitive, was demonstrably superior for reconnaissance and light transport roles. German units were actively seeking to capture and use enemy equipment, suggesting deficiencies in Wehrmacht vehicles. Some German officers recommended accelerating production of four-wheel drive variants of the Kübelwagen. Others suggested that Germany simply could not compete with American production capacity and should focus instead on other areas where German engineering held advantages, like heavy tanks and artillery. The debate became moot. By mid-1943, German industry was struggling to maintain production levels of any vehicles while facing increasing Allied bombing raids. Introducing a new four-wheel drive light vehicle design was impossible. Germany would have to fight with what it had. Meanwhile, Jeep production in America continued to accelerate. By the end of 1943, total production exceeded 360,000 vehicles. The production process had been refined to extraordinary efficiency. Willys plant workers in Toledo could completely assemble a Jeep from raw components in less than 3 hours. Parts were manufactured in factories across 32 states, then shipped to Toledo or Ford plants in Dallas and Louisville for final assembly. The standardization was so complete that parts from any factory would fit any vehicle. A carburetor built in Wisconsin would work perfectly in a Jeep assembled in Kentucky. This interchangeability, combined with massive production volumes, created a logistical advantage unprecedented in military history. Every Jeep in the field could be maintained with parts from any supply depot. Compare this to German logistics, where different vehicles required specific parts from specific manufacturers, creating nightmares for supply officers trying to keep mechanically diverse motor pools operational. The transformation in German attitudes toward the Jeep accelerated dramatically with the Allied invasion of Italy in September 1943. American and British forces landing at Salerno brought thousands of Jeeps ashore in the initial waves. German forces defending Italy got their most sustained exposure yet to American mechanization. In the mountains of southern Italy, where roads were primitive and terrain brutally difficult, the Jeep's advantages became overwhelming. German forces attempting to establish defensive positions found themselves outpaced by American reconnaissance units in Jeeps that could navigate mountain trails impassable to heavier vehicles. German counterattacks that relied on surprise found that American units were almost impossible to surprise because Jeep-mounted patrols provided constant intelligence on German movements. Every American infantry regiment had approximately 145 Jeeps assigned. That meant American commanders had mobility and flexibility that German officers could only dream of. A German regimental commander might have a handful of staff cars and motorcycles. His American counterpart had a fleet of Jeeps that could rapidly reposition troops, evacuate wounded, move supplies, and provide mobile communications. The casualty evacuation capability particularly impressed German medical officers who treated wounded prisoners. American Jeeps could be quickly converted to ambulances by mounting stretchers across the rear seats. This meant wounded soldiers could reach field hospitals within minutes of being injured, dramatically improving survival rates. German wounded often faced hours-long journeys over rough roads in conventional ambulances. The difference in survival rates was measurable. Captured German medical personnel reported their shock at how quickly American wounded received treatment, transported rapidly from front lines in vehicles that could traverse any terrain. In December 1943, Generalleutnant Friedrich Schultz, captured near Cassino, was interviewed by American intelligence officers. When asked about American equipment, he stated flatly that Nazi generals admired the Jeep more than any other American material. It was, he said, the vehicle they most liked to capture for general use. This assessment from a senior German officer with extensive combat experience marked a complete reversal from the dismissive reports of early 1942. By early 1944, captured Jeeps had become so prized among German forces in Italy that special orders were issued regarding their use. Captured American vehicles were to be clearly marked with German insignia to prevent friendly fire incidents. Maintenance crews were trained specifically on Jeep mechanics. Fuel allocation for captured vehicles was given priority, despite their higher consumption compared to Kübelwagens. The reasoning was simple. A Jeep could accomplish reconnaissance missions that might require 2 or 3 German vehicles. Its speed, range, and cross-country capability made it more valuable than German equipment despite using more fuel. German units operating captured Jeeps reported significantly improved tactical mobility. They could conduct reconnaissance deeper into Allied lines, moving faster and covering more ground than was possible with Kübelwagens. The four-wheel drive system meant they could operate in weather and terrain conditions that would immobilize German vehicles. The intelligence value was enormous. A German reconnaissance team in a captured Jeep could pass for American at distance, allowing them to move closer to Allied positions before being identified. The Jeep's mechanical reliability meant fewer breakdowns during critical missions. Its simple design meant that even minimally trained mechanics could perform field repairs. Operation Grief during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided the most dramatic example of German desire for captured Jeeps. When Adolf Hitler ordered Otto Skorzeny to conduct special operations behind American lines, Skorzeny specifically requested large numbers of captured American vehicles, particularly Jeeps. The plan required German commandos, dressed in American uniforms, to penetrate Allied lines and create confusion. Skorzeny requested at least 100 captured Jeeps for the operation. German supply officers scoured rear areas and contacted every unit that might have captured American vehicles. They managed to acquire approximately 30 Jeeps, far fewer than requested. The shortage forced Skorzeny to improvise, disguising German vehicles to look like American equipment. The fact that even with Hitler's personal backing and unlimited authority, German forces could only scrape together 30 captured Jeeps revealed how difficult they were to acquire. American forces simply had too many Jeeps, and German forces had too few opportunities to capture them intact. The commandos who did receive captured Jeeps for Operation Greif found them remarkably effective for infiltration. Dressed in American uniforms and driving genuine American Jeeps, German soldiers managed to penetrate Allied lines and cause significant confusion during the opening days of the Battle of the Bulge. American checkpoint guards became paranoid, questioning everyone and demanding answers to trivia questions about American culture. The captured commandos, when interrogated, consistently praised the Jeep's performance. They noted its speed allowed quick escapes, its maneuverability helped evade checkpoints, and its ubiquity meant one more Jeep attracted no special attention. The operation failed strategically, but it demonstrated how effectively German soldiers could operate American equipment when given the opportunity. The Jeeps themselves performed flawlessly in German hands, suggesting that any perceived deficiencies had more to do with fuel availability than engineering shortcomings. The invasion of France in June 1944 brought Jeep numbers to levels that astonished German defenders. Operation Overlord involved landing approximately 20,000 Jeeps in the first weeks of the invasion. German forces defending Normandy found themselves facing an American army with mobility beyond anything they had encountered. Every German after-action report from Normandy mentioned American mobility advantages. While German infantry divisions relied primarily on horse-drawn transport, with only a fraction of their vehicles motorized, American divisions were fully mechanized. This meant American units could maneuver faster, concentrate forces more rapidly, and respond to threats more quickly than German forces. The Jeep was central to this advantage. It served as scout car, command vehicle, communications platform, weapons carrier, ambulance, and general transport. German officers captured in Normandy consistently mentioned American Jeeps when asked about equipment advantages. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding a Panzer reconnaissance battalion, wrote in his memoirs that he had personally used a captured American Jeep for several weeks after his own vehicle was destroyed. He found it superior to German reconnaissance vehicles in almost every respect except fuel economy. The German fuel shortage in France during summer 1944 made captured Jeeps increasingly impractical to operate. Even when German units successfully captured Jeeps intact, operating them became difficult as fuel supplies dwindled. Some German commanders ordered that captured Jeeps be used only for the most critical missions to conserve scarce fuel. Others simply abandoned captured vehicles when fuel supplies ran out. This created a perverse situation where German forces desperately wanted American Jeeps, but often could not use them effectively even when captured. The few German units that maintained access to fuel supplies, primarily SS Panzer divisions that received priority allocation, continued operating captured Jeeps throughout the summer of 1944. These units reported that the vehicles remained superior for reconnaissance despite fuel consumption. The strategic mobility and tactical flexibility they provided justified the extra fuel cost. One captured SS officer told interrogators that his unit would trade 2 Kübelwagens for 1 American Jeep if fuel were available to operate it. The technical comparison between the Jeep and Kübelwagen reveals why German soldiers so strongly preferred the American vehicle. The Kübelwagen weighed approximately 1,600 pounds, lighter than the Jeep's 2,100 pounds. It was powered by an air-cooled engine producing 23.5 horsepower initially, upgraded to 25 horsepower in 1943, still less than half the Jeep's 60 horsepower. This gave the Kübelwagen a power-to-weight ratio of approximately 15 horsepower per ton, while the Jeep achieved approximately 28 horsepower per ton. The performance difference was dramatic. The Jeep could accelerate faster, climb steeper grades, and maintain higher speeds. The Kübelwagen's top speed was about 50 miles per hour on roads, but it struggled to maintain this speed off-road. The Jeep's top speed approached 55 miles per hour, and it could maintain 40 miles per hour across rough terrain. The four-wheel drive difference was even more critical. The Kübelwagen relied on rear-wheel drive with a self-locking differential and portal gear reduction hubs. This clever engineering provided surprisingly good off-road performance in many conditions. The flat underbody meant the vehicle could slide over obstacles rather than becoming stuck. In sand, snow and mud, the Kübelwagen's lightweight and flat floor sometimes gave it advantages. But in steep terrain, crossing obstacles, or any situation requiring maximum traction, the Jeep's four-wheel drive proved superior. Power to all 4 wheels meant the Jeep could climb grades and traverse obstacles impossible for the Kübelwagen. American testing showed Jeeps could climb 60% grades fully loaded. The Kübelwagen could barely manage 30% grades with similar loads. Reliability became another critical factor. The Kübelwagen's air-cooled engine was simple and reliable in theory, but its limited power meant it was constantly working at maximum output under combat conditions. This led to premature wear and failures. The Jeep's more powerful engine rarely operated at maximum output, reducing stress and extending service life. Maintenance requirements favoured the Jeep as well. While the Kübelwagen was designed for simplicity, the Jeep's standardization meant parts were universally available. German mechanics working on Kübelwagens often faced long waits for replacement parts manufactured only in Germany. American mechanics working on Jeeps simply grabbed parts from the nearest supply depot, where stocks were measured in thousands of components. The most telling comparison came from German units that operated both vehicles. Given free choice, with adequate fuel available, German soldiers almost universally preferred captured American Jeeps over their own Kübelwagens. This preference appeared in captured documents, interrogation reports, and post-war memoirs from German officers who had commanded units with access to both vehicles. The production statistics reveal the true magnitude of American industrial advantage. From 1941 through 1945, Willys produced 361,339 MB Jeeps. Ford built 277,896 GPW Jeeps. Combined production exceeded 639,000 vehicles built to identical specifications. Germany, by comparison, produced exactly 50,435 Kübelwagens during the entire war. This meant America built more than 12 times as many quarter-ton vehicles as Germany. The ratio became even more favorable to America when considering that roughly 30% of American Jeep production went to Allied forces through Lend-Lease. Britain received thousands of Jeeps. The Soviet Union received tens of thousands. Free French forces were equipped entirely with American vehicles, including thousands of Jeeps. This meant German forces faced Jeeps not only when fighting Americans, but also when engaging British, Soviet and French units. The universality of the Jeep across all Allied forces created additional advantages. When American, British and Free French units operated together, they could share spare parts and maintenance support for their Jeeps. German forces, by contrast, operated a bewildering variety of light vehicles from different manufacturers with non-interchangeable parts. Standardization extended beyond the vehicles themselves. The American military trained mechanics using standardized curricula, regardless of which theater they would serve in. A mechanic trained in Kansas could maintain Jeeps in Italy or the Pacific with equal proficiency. Training manuals were identical across all theaters. Parts catalogues were universally applicable. This standardization created an enormous efficiency advantage that multiplied the value of American industrial production. Producing 600,000 identical vehicles was strategically superior to producing 600,000 varied vehicles. The logistics alone justified standardization. American supply officers could calculate spare parts requirements knowing that every Jeep in the field used identical components. German supply officers faced nightmares trying to stock parts for dozens of different vehicle types. The Jeep's versatility exceeded anything German planners had envisioned for light vehicles. It served not just as reconnaissance car and command vehicle, but in dozens of specialized roles. Jeeps mounted with machine guns served as fast-moving weapons platforms. The SAS in North Africa famously used Jeeps mounting multiple machine guns for raids on German airfields, approaching at high speed with guns blazing. Jeeps modified with wire cutters protected crews from throat-height wires the Germans strung across roads to decapitate motorcycle and Jeep drivers. Jeeps equipped with radios became mobile communications centers. Jeeps mounting stretchers served as fast ambulances. Jeeps towing small trailers moved supplies forward and wounded back. Jeeps fitted with railway wheels could run on tracks when roads were destroyed. Engineered Jeeps carried generators and welding equipment. Forward observers used Jeeps to move rapidly between firing positions. Reconnaissance units in Jeeps could cover enormous distances, providing intelligence impossible to gather with slower vehicles. Airborne divisions loaded Jeeps into gliders, providing paratroopers with immediate mobility after landing. Some Jeeps were made amphibious, though this variant was less successful than the standard model. The adaptability of the basic design meant units could modify Jeeps for specific missions using local resources and minimal tools. A standard Jeep could become a weapons platform in hours by welding mounting brackets for machine guns. It could become an ambulance in minutes by installing stretcher racks. This flexibility made the Jeep extraordinarily valuable in fluid combat situations where requirements changed rapidly. German light vehicles, while capable in their designed roles, lacked this adaptability. The Kübelwagen was an excellent reconnaissance car but difficult to modify for other uses. Its limited power meant adding weight or equipment significantly degraded performance. The Jeep's power margin meant it could carry additional equipment, armor or weapons while still maintaining adequate performance. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, later identified the Jeep as one of 5 pieces of equipment most vital to Allied success in Africa and Europe. The other 4 were the C-47 transport aircraft, the 2.5-ton truck, the bulldozer, and the DUKW amphibious vehicle. Eisenhower noted that, curiously, none of these 5 critical items were combat vehicles. They were tools for mobility, logistics, and construction. The Jeep's inclusion in this list, selected from all American equipment by the Supreme Commander himself, testified to its strategic importance. The production tempo staggers the imagination. At peak production in 1944, combined output exceeded 15,000 Jeeps monthly, averaging 500 per day. The logistics required coordination across hundreds of component suppliers, with engines, transmissions, axles, and body panels converging on assembly lines with precision timing. The efficiency improved constantly throughout the war. Early production in 1941 required significantly more man-hours per vehicle than late production in 1944. Learning curves, process improvements, and automation steadily reduced the labour required to build each Jeep. By 1944, the man-hours required to build a Jeep had dropped by nearly 40% compared to 1941, even as production volume increased dramatically. Cost reductions paralleled efficiency gains. The initial contract in July 1941 specified a unit cost of $738.74 per vehicle. By 1944, improved production processes had reduced the effective cost to approximately $600 per Jeep. This meant America was building more Jeeps, faster and cheaper as the war progressed, the opposite of the German experience where production declined, costs increased, and efficiency degraded under Allied bombing. The final year of the war, 1945, saw German forces in complete collapse. Fuel shortages, ammunition shortages, and the disintegration of German logistics meant that even when German units captured American equipment, they often could not use it. Abandoned American vehicles littered the roads of Germany as German forces retreated. Yet even in these desperate final months, individual German soldiers continued seeking captured American Jeeps when possible. Personal mobility remained valuable even as strategic mobility collapsed. German officers used captured Jeeps to move between disintegrating units. German soldiers used them to flee advancing Allied armies. The Jeep had gone from being dismissed as primitive in 1942 to being the most desired vehicle in the German military by 1945. Post-war interrogations of German officers provided the final assessment. When asked to evaluate American equipment, German commanders consistently rated the Jeep among the most impressive American achievements. Some rated it more strategically valuable than American tanks or aircraft. The reasoning was consistent. Tanks and aircraft were dramatic and drew attention, but the Jeep enabled everything else. It provided the mobility, flexibility, and logistics that made American operations possible. Superior firepower meant nothing without the logistics to supply it. Advanced tactics required mobility to implement. The Jeep, perhaps more than any other single piece of equipment, embodied American industrial and organizational advantages. The production numbers, standardization, reliability, and versatility of the Jeep represented everything about American methods that Germany could not match. General Major Fritz Bayerlein, who had commanded Panzer-Lehr Division in Normandy, told interrogators after the war that the American Jeep was among the 3 most valuable pieces of equipment the Allies possessed. The other 2 were the long-range fighter aircraft that protected bomber streams and the proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells that devastated German aircraft. The Jeep made this list not because it was more powerful or more deadly than other weapons, but because it multiplied the effectiveness of everything else. The transformation of German attitudes toward the American Jeep traces one of the war's most complete reversals. In 1941 and 1942, intelligence officers dismissed it as primitive and inferior to German vehicles. By 1943, combat units actively sought to capture Jeeps. By 1944, special maintenance crews trained specifically to keep captured Jeeps operational. Even in 1945, as everything collapsed, German soldiers still prized American Jeeps above nearly all other equipment. The progression reveals the broader story of the war. Germany entered the conflict with confidence in its technical and tactical superiority. German vehicles, German tactics, and German soldiers were assumed to be the best in the world. Early victories seemed to confirm these assumptions, but American industrial capacity, organizational ability, and engineering pragmatism gradually overwhelmed German advantages. The Jeep epitomized this process. It was not the most sophisticated light vehicle. German engineers could point to specific features of the Kübelwagen that showed greater cleverness, but sophistication mattered less than production capacity, reliability, and standardization. America built enough Jeeps to equip every unit that needed them, maintained them with universal spare parts, and employed them flexibly across every combat role imaginable. German soldiers recognized this reality faster than German high command. Soldiers in the field saw that American units had mobility. German forces could not match. They saw that American wounded reached hospitals faster, American supplies moved forward more quickly, and American commanders could respond to changing situations more rapidly. Much of this advantage stemmed from having enough jeeps that mobility became routine rather than exceptional. When German commanders captured intact American supply depots, they found warehouses full of Jeep spare parts. When they examined American organizational charts, they found that even the smallest American units had Jeep allocations. When they observed American operations, they saw Jeeps everywhere, performing every conceivable task from carrying generals to towing artillery to evacuating wounded. The ubiquity of the Jeep in American forces had no German equivalent. Kübelwagens were valuable but scarce. German light vehicles were carefully husbanded and assigned only to priority units. American Jeeps were so numerous that they seemed disposable. Units that lost Jeeps to enemy action simply requisitioned replacements from supply depots stocked with thousands of vehicles. This abundance created strategic flexibility. American commanders could plan operations assuming unlimited vehicle availability. German commanders had to carefully ration vehicle assignments and could not plan operations that required more vehicles than were available. The constraints shaped strategic possibilities. The Jeep's mechanical simplicity meant that damaged vehicles could often be repaired quickly. American maintenance doctrine emphasized rapid field repairs with extensive spare parts stocks. Vehicles damaged beyond field repair were simply replaced rather than waiting for depot-level overhaul. This approach required enormous supply chains but resulted in consistently high operational readiness rates. German maintenance doctrine emphasized careful repair and conservation because replacement vehicles were scarce. Damaged vehicles received multiple repairs and overhauls, keeping them operational but often with degraded performance. The fundamental difference in approach reflected different industrial capacities. America could afford to build vehicles with some redundancy, accept battlefield losses, and continuously supply replacement equipment. Germany had to carefully conserve every vehicle because industrial capacity could not replace losses. The Jeep's success influenced post-war vehicle development worldwide. Every major military began projects to develop Jeep equivalents. The British Land Rover, the Soviet Gaz-69, the French Delahaye FIF LR, and dozens of other vehicles were directly inspired by wartime experience with American Jeeps. Even Germany, divided and occupied after 1945, developed its own Jeep derivative when the Bundeswehr was formed. The DKW Munger, introduced in 1956, showed clear Jeep influence in its layout and capabilities. Japan, which had fought against Jeep-equipped Allied forces in the Pacific, developed the Toyota Land Cruiser partially based on studying captured American Jeeps. The civilian market transformed even more dramatically. Willys recognized the Jeep's commercial potential during the war. In 1945, as military production wound down, Willys introduced the CJ-2A civilian Jeep. This vehicle retained the military Jeep's basic layout, but added features for civilian use like a tailgate, side-mounted spare tire, and slightly more comfortable seating. Farmers, ranchers, construction companies, and outdoor enthusiasts embraced the civilian Jeep. It could work all day pulling farm equipment, then serve as family transportation. It could access remote construction sites or hunting camps inaccessible to conventional vehicles. The CJ-2A sold for $1,090, expensive for the time but justified by versatility. Sales were strong enough that Willys continued developing civilian Jeep variants. The CJ-3A in 1949 added a one-piece windshield. The CJ-5 in 1955 became one of the longest-running vehicle models in history, remaining in production for 31 years. The civilian Jeep market grew steadily through the 1950s and 1960s, then exploded in the 1970s as recreational four-wheel drive vehicles became popular. The Jeep brand passed through several corporate owners, from Willys to Kaiser to American Motors to Chrysler. Each owner recognized the value of the Jeep name and heritage. Modern Jeep vehicles like the Wrangler deliberately echo the original MB design, with vertical grille slots and exposed hinges. The direct lineage from the 1941 military Jeep to modern civilian SUVs represents one of the most successful product evolutions in automotive history. Annual Jeep sales now exceed 1 million vehicles worldwide. The original military requirement for a light reconnaissance car spawned an entire vehicle category that generates tens of billions of dollars in annual sales. The German experience with captured American Jeeps offers lessons that extend beyond vehicle engineering. Superior technology means little without supporting infrastructure. The Kübelwagen was clever engineering, but cleverness could not compensate for limited production, scarce spare parts, and insufficient fuel supplies. The Jeep succeeded not because it was the most sophisticated possible design, but because it was good enough and built in overwhelming quantities with comprehensive logistical support. Standardization proved more valuable than optimization. Rather than developing multiple vehicle variants optimized for specific roles, America built one standardized vehicle adaptable to many roles. This created enormous advantages in production, maintenance, training, and logistics that outweighed any performance benefits from specialized vehicles. Mass production required different engineering philosophies. German vehicles often featured tight tolerances and precision manufacturing. This created excellent performance when new but made field maintenance difficult and required specialized parts. American vehicles, particularly the Jeep, featured looser tolerances and simpler construction. Performance suffered slightly, but reliability and maintainability improved dramatically. Industrial capacity mattered more than individual weapons quality. German tanks, aircraft, and small arms often showed superior engineering compared to American equivalents. But superior individual weapons could not overcome massive numerical disadvantages. America built 643,000 Jeeps during the war. Germany built 50,000 Kübelwagens. The 12-to-1 ratio told the strategic story. Training and doctrine multiplied equipment advantages. American forces trained extensively on vehicle maintenance and developed doctrine that emphasized mobility. This meant American units extracted maximum value from their vehicle advantages. German forces, trained in infantry-centered tactics from an army that still relied heavily on horse transport, sometimes failed to exploit fully their own mechanized equipment. Perception and reality sometimes diverged dramatically. German intelligence initially dismissed the Jeep based on superficial assessment. Combat experience revealed the massive gap between perceived capabilities and actual performance. Organizations that rely on theoretical analysis rather than empirical testing risk catastrophic miscalculations. Logistics determine strategic possibilities. The availability of spare parts, fuel, and maintenance support often mattered more than vehicle specifications. German units sometimes possessed superior equipment rendered useless by logistics failures. American logistics ensured that Jeeps remained operational regardless of location or combat intensity. The laughter stopped in Tunisia. By May 1943, as German forces surrendered in North Africa, dismissive jokes about American engineering had disappeared from Wehrmacht reports, replaced by requests for captured American vehicles and grudging admissions that American methods produced effective results. The progression reveals the broader story of how American industrial capacity gradually overwhelmed initial German advantages. The Jeep epitomized this process, not through sophistication, but through production capacity, reliability, and standardization multiplied across hundreds of thousands of vehicles. General George Marshall's assessment proved prophetic. The Jeep was indeed America's greatest contribution to modern warfare, not as the most powerful weapon, but as the enabler of everything else. The Willys MB and Ford GPW served faithfully through Korea and beyond. But their influence exceeded service life, proving that mass production of standardized equipment, supported by efficient logistics, could decisively influence military outcomes, and demonstrating that industrial capacity was itself a form of military power. The German soldiers who laughed at the Jeep in 1941 had underestimated American industrial might. By 1943, they were trying to capture these vehicles. By 1945, they recognized that the Jeep represented everything about American power they had failed to understand. The Jeep went everywhere, did everything, and kept going, just as America had designed it to do.